Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Scott Malbaurn and I am the director of the Schneider Museum of Art, part of the Oregon Center for the Arts here at SOU. Please note that we have you all on mute and please stay on mute until the end of the talk. If you have any questions, please type those into the chat or save them for the end of the talk. Today I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest, MK Guth, who is participating in an online exhibition titled What Needs to Be Said, Hallie Ford Fellows in the Visual Arts. The exhibition brings together the 13 artists who have received the Hallie Ford Fellowship in the Visual Arts between 2014 and 2016, an award given annually to artists living in Oregon that is based on accomplishment, depth of practice, and future potential. MK Guth is a multidisciplinary artist whose work frequently has an element of audience participation. Guth has received a Betty Bowen Award from the Seattle Art Museum in Seattle, Washington, and an Award of Merit from the Bellevue Art Museum in Bellevue, Washington. MK was featured in the 2008 Whitney Biennial at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, New York, and has exhibited with numerous galleries and institutions, including the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Boise Art Museum in Boise, Idaho, and Shanti Carioca in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Melbourne International Arts Festival in Melbourne, Australia, Knot Dance Festival in Nottingham, UK, Swiss Institute, White Columns, Artist Space, all in New York, New York, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, California, Henry Art Gallery in Seattle, Washington, and the Hallie Ford Museum of Art in Salem, Oregon. Guth is represented by the Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland, Oregon, and the Kristen Tierney Gallery in New York, New York. Please join me in welcoming MK Guth. Hi, MK.
Hi, Scott. Thanks so much for having me to the Creative Industries discussions. Thank you to the Schneider Museum and the team there, and to the Hallie Ford, the Ford Family Foundation that supports the Hallie Ford Fellows. And special thanks to Tyler Nolan. Wow, spotlight. That was pretty awesome. I might have to hire you. So thank you for that. That was great. It's terrific to be here with all of you. And in a way, right, Scott, I'm back.
You are back.
I did a residency with y'all some years ago, which actually will look at some of the work that was produced during that residency.
Thanks, MK. And just to begin, I always like to check in. How are you doing during these pandemic times?
I'm doing fine. I mean, I think doesn't matter who you are or what industry you're working in. It's pretty tough right now. And it's because we're talking about creative industries. I think it's specifically tough in this area. Things are shifting, platforms are shifting, artists are being asked to do things in ways that they hadn't really thought about before. Platforms are disappearing and changing shape. And I'm also an educator. I'm the director of the Hallie Ford School of Graduate Studies at PNCA. So teaching is different. It's a challenge for faculty and for students alike. We spend a lot of time in this place. So it's tough. There's no doubt, but there's a lot of interesting and new things that are coming out of it too that I think are positive. So at least in regards to teaching, it's especially for those with disabilities, it's creating a lot more access. And even in regards to exhibitions, there's exhibitions because they're online that are far more reaching than they've been before. So I see good things as well as the tough stuff.
I agree. Thank you, MK. MK, I've made you a co-host so you can share your screen whenever you are ready.
Okay, here we go. Let's keep our fingers crossed that this is going to work. Okay, so are you handing it over to me, Scott?
You got it.
Okay, thanks again, everyone, for for joining in today. First, I just want to say that it's really an honor to be in this exhibition, because these are a group of artists that I know all of them, and I have great respect for them. And you know, Lynn Taylor Woods, Samantha Wall, Storm Tharp and Blair Saxon Hill, our studio mates, Tanaz, they're all people whose work I look to and respect. And while I know that Diana Nawi really looked at using the title "What Needs to Be Said" as something that kind of took into consideration kind of a global representation of artist practice, I really look at it as a group of artists that give voice, tangible voice, to a lot of different specific concerns, regardless if that's identity or technology or politics or indigeneity or cultural diversity or artistic form. The group of artists that are in this exhibition really do give voice to these concerns, which is why it's such an honor to be included. And I also believe that I give voice, but maybe in a little different way, because for me, giving voice often means affording the participant or the viewer or the collaborator, however you want to define that, a voice in the creation of the work. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I am an artist that works in image making and object making, but today I want to kind of focus primarily on the more interactive, participatory aspects of my work. And objects obviously are going to be there because everything kind of in my practice connects in that way. And I want to start out with this piece, since it's you're seeing it a lot in ads for the show, and it's where the title comes from. And I want to talk about what inspired this piece, and it'll become clear in just a moment. So this piece actually came about in the process of researching another work that I produced about a year earlier. And we're going to look at that piece too. But in the process of researching for this other work, I came across this poem by Nikki Giovanni called Harvest, a poem for Rosa Parks. Maybe some of you have read it. If you haven't, it's really just an incredibly stunning poem. And it's also Rosa Parks' birthday today. So I thought this would be kind of an appropriate way to start out talking about this particular work, and then how it connects to the other works in this series. And in this poem, what's unusual about this poem is Giovanni starts out by telling a story, and it's almost like the starting of a joke. So she had learned about this old story in church one evening about a preacher and a deacon fishing. And it seemed like every time that the good brother, Sir Giovanni's words, got a bite, the fish would scamper away and the deacon would begin to curse. And this happened over and over again. And finally, the preacher said, "Do you think it's appropriate that you should be talking like this, especially in front of me? I think you should be you shouldn't be talking like this. You shouldn't be saying these things." And the deacon checked himself and reminded himself of his vows and said, "You're right, I shouldn't. Okay, I'm not going to say these things anymore." And continues to go fish, continues to fish, and continues to, the fish keeps losing the fish. And finally, after fishing for a while longer, the deacon gets a big fish on his line. And right at the last minute, this fish falls off the line, and the deacon checks himself, reminds himself of his vow, checks himself again, reminds himself of his vow, and then turns to the preacher and says, "Reverend, something needs to be said." And this is how Giovanni introduces this poem. And then the poem goes on to talk and really give voice to Rosa Parks, as though Rosa Parks is speaking, and talks about how she was in the NAACP, and that she was the secretary for the Montgomery branch, and that she was already involved kind of with the civil rights movement. It wasn't talking about her sore feet, but rather as she as an activist. And kind of towards the end, gets to the end of the poem, and there are other people that day that chose to get up and move when they were asked to, and she chose to remain. And that this was like solid footing and this is what needed to be done. So Giovanni really starts with this story, like to kind of frame this idea that throughout life, we are always being put in a position where we're being asked to quiet our voice, hushed, or in some way or another asked to not speak up, but that conditions arise in such a way that it demands us to have voice. It demands us to speak up. And I felt like starting the poem in this way and then going into this deep kind of beautiful story of this historic figure, this activist, for me really influenced what the difficulty in making a choice to speak up. And so I wanted to create a piece that kind of gave the audience an opportunity to have a container to voice what they felt needed to be said. And in this case, it could be around love, it could be around politics, identity, ecology, art. I like to give categories in my work because I feel that it allows for a prompt and it gives some parameters for the viewer and it helps them to generate ideas. So this was the first in a series of stacks, and I call them book stacks. When they're on display, they're active and people can write in them. Each person is given a page. Okay, well, it's showing, but it's not moving. Oh, there we go. So the audience member is offered a page. You can write one thing or you can fill it. And in the case of Getting Over It, there's 4,000 pages that can be viewers' voices. And when it's not on view, it's tied off and exists as a stack of books or as a kind of a graphic object. This is another one, A Memory About. So this is one of the ways that I work with audience to activate the audience and to afford them voice in the creation of a work. Another way that I've done this in the past, and I'm going to jump around a lot today, so it's not going to be in chronological order. Another way that I do this is through a series of braid projects. This is Fireworks Astronaut Deep Pool Venus. And much like the stacks of books, they're soliciting information from the viewer. This was produced for an exhibition called the Memory Palace for the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati Contemporary Art Center. And for 4 days, you could come to this table, write a memory that dealt with either celebration, risk-taking and adventure, sorrow, or love, and they were woven into my hair. The comments were woven into this ever-growing braids that were coming off of my hair. So in essence, I was wearing the braids and they were attached. And then at the end of the 4 days, they were cut and hung in the gallery. I think about this a lot as something that Jacques Rancière, this French cat, French theorist, as creating a community of storytellers and translators, that in essence, the audience becomes part of the work. They make the work, it's their own, they're translating it. And Rancière calls this an emancipated spectator, and that this type of spectator, in fact, blurs the lines between performer and viewer. So this was another braid piece that was not off my body. We're gonna look at a couple others that were attached. And this was a piece that was produced for the Park Avenue Armory in 2008 for the Whitney Biennial, called Ties of Protection and Safekeeping. And this piece actually traveled across the country, and it started in Portland, Oregon at the Girding Theater, which was also an armory. And it traveled to a series of different cities. And with each different city, people were invited to write on a red ribbon what they thought was worth protecting. And with each additional ribbon, the braid would grow longer and longer and longer. And when it reached the Park Avenue Armory, and I had the library space in the Park Avenue Armory, it was 500 feet. And then it was active for another 10 days. I should just say, whenever I do these projects, I make uniforms, because in essence, I like to set either the folks that are helping me or myself kind of apart from the rest of the audience. And often it's also a way to carry materials and to hold the weight of the braids and other things. But each day, the braid grew longer and longer and longer, and took up more and more of the space of the Park Avenue Armory Library. And that library was designed by Tiffany and Company, and it's very masculine. The cases are filled with trophies and medals and awards. It's very dark, mahogany, and so in essence, this very kind of masculine space is being consumed by this very feminine object. So the site of history kind of gets consumed by these contemporary notions of protection. And like all good work, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? So in the production of this piece, I was thinking a lot about Duchamp's Mile of String, because I was trying to envision what would it mean to make something that was so big and make it difficult for audiences to kind of maneuver through. And after the performative period, that remained up as this object that the audience could move through. So another piece that was done the same year, which was I Feel the Same. And this, much like the first piece that I showed, was off of my body, but only for 2 days. And this was actually the first piece that I did that was connected to my own hair. And it asked people to write their opinions or their ideas about the word feminism. And over 2 days, it grew longer. And at the end, it too was cut and left at the Yerba Buena Art Center as a sculptural object. This is a piece that was also off my body in Las Vegas called Best Wishes, Las Vegas, when in Rome. But this piece actually attached to the building itself. So when I would go in at the beginning of the day for the project, the folks that were working with me, my assistants, would weave my hair as it grew longer into the architecture of the space, so that I kind of became one with the space. So there were 2 braiders that sat behind me, and you could come in and either sometimes it got pretty busy towards the end of the day, and people could write, I could move around. But usually in the earlier part of the day, it was pretty quiet. So people could come and just sit and talk. And in essence, it was almost like a strange kind of confessional site where people could talk about the things they cared about and things that they desired, and it could be woven into the braid. And then at the end, it was cut off, but before the piece was cut off, a series of photos were created. And as I said, a lot of my work either creates images or photos or is incited by them. And I'm not going to show much of this type of parts of my practice, but I wanted to show these. And then at the end, it was woven into an object. So after the duration of the exhibition was over, this came back to my studio, and over the next several months, it was turned into this object. So there's been a series of these kind of braid pieces, but the interaction with the audience mounts an object. And for me, why that's important is that I like for there to be, I don't like to show images or videos of the performative aspects of my work, because in a way, for me, that's always about telling folks what they missed, not about what's actually what they're looking at. So I want to offer up a new experience. So those objects or those images might have echo some of the original performance, but they offer up something new. The next kind of group of work that I want to show you, instead of creating an interaction that mounts an object, it's the opposite, where objects incite interactions. And these, I call these still lifes, and they're all around dinners, and they come with usually on some plinth or a shelf. And there's a book that gives instructions and images and drawings for a particular dinner. And then again, some type of object. This is a dinner for an artist, and it's based on a Toulouse-Lautrec dinner that he created at his studio, where the people had this long dinner, and then at the end of the dinner, they were invited in to a parlor, what was then called a parlor, for dessert. And instead of receiving dessert, he unveiled a new work of art by a new artist called Degas. Isn't that amazing? I mean, Degas was new at one point. These works kind of came out of my love of instructions. and recipes. And I just want to show this because, again, like, I'm an artist that spends a lot of time researching. It's part of my practice. And I also really look to a lot of different thinkers and artists for inspiration in my work. And A Winter Carol by Dick Higgins is like, it's one of my favorite pieces. And I love this idea that any number of people may perform this composition. They do so by agreeing in advance on a duration for the composition and then going out to listen in the falling snow. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if all of us on this Zoom chat right now just said, okay, for the next, and it was snowing outside, for the next 2 minutes, we're gonna leave this Zoom chat, we're gonna go stand outside, and we're gonna go listen to the snow and feel it, those flakes fall on our face. The thing that I like about instructions or these types of compositions is it focuses our attention, right? If even for a moment of time, and makes us more intentful. And then the kitchen piece by Yoko Ono is something that I always, find delight in. Hang a canvas on a wall, throw all your leftovers you have in the kitchen that day on the canvas. You may prepare special food for this piece. I will probably never do this. This is part of her instruction piece in a book called Grapefruit. But I like the idea of it. I like imagining that I might. And that's the thing that I think has some values in these kind of instruction-based works. And I'm going to get to that and how it connects to my work in a moment. This is a piece by Alison Knowles. There are no good photos of the original piece because it was done in 1962. It's been done many times since, but I like to show the original. And she called it an event score. It literally was the creation. She performed making a salad and then offered it up to the audience to eat. And that was the performance. So it was this collaboration, but this performative part the artist did also became this kind of gift to the audience members themselves. When I say that I like the idea of instructions, I've thought a lot about where I fall, because people talk about compositions and scores and instructions. There's all these different ways that somebody can anchor this language for themselves. I really like the language of the recipe, because for me, the recipe is something that fundamentally, we break the rules of recipes. You get a recipe, it's definitely a set of instructions, but maybe you follow those instructions once, or you use it as a guide, but you're invited to or expected to break the rules. And so for me, I look at these kind of instructional book pieces in a way as a recipe for something that you can use it, but you can break the rules in it as well. So the first set of book pieces that I'm going to show, I'm just going to show a few, come from an exhibition in 2012 called Nothing Else Subsists, Smell and Taste Remain, which is comes from Remembrance of Things Past, Proust. And in that show, there was a series, it was the first series of these types of books. This is A Dinner for John Cage. And as I said, they come with objects and they come with instructions. So for example, this particular one was very didactic. It was for 10 people. And the folks that were made the recipes and performed the dinner also had to perform compositions, a composition called Mushrooms et Variations of John Cage. This is A Dinner for the Woods. And it tells you it's for 2 people. It gives you instructions for what you might do or how you might experience the wood. And then it gives you 2, these are pie irons, by the way. It's the first time I cast iron. It was pretty exciting. So you can use that device to make the dinner. And then often with these earlier pieces, there were a series of other books that kind of framed the thematic concern. And there are drawings and photos that you would find in the book. This is A Dinner for a Funeral. It has absolutely nothing to do with funerals, but it comes from a poem by Alain Bosquet, a French surrealist poet, called Every Choice Implies a Funeral. And so this piece was really about that moment when you make a decision, like, oh, should I go to graduate school? So initially you're pondering that, but once you make a decision, yes, I'm going to go, and you choose a place that you're going to go, all of those previous options fall off, and yet you're not quite there. So, and you're not quite in graduate school or starting that new job or moving to a new city. So it's that kind of in-between space, that liminal space. So the images in that were all thresholds or combinations of thresholds. And then often there were instructions on how to produce the recipes. So Dinner to Plan a Revolution. This is the piece that I mentioned this is the piece I was doing research for when I came across the Nicky Giovanni poem. And so, and actually this was being produced during my residency with SOU in the Schneider Museum. So this is part of the work that I did during that residency. And we actually, so like the rest of them, they start with a set of instructions. And this one came with a set of, in the book, it came with a thumb drive with the flags or pages with the flags that were designed to be placemats for the dinner. Let's see. And on the back of that would be a poem by it's actually lyrics to a song by Assata Shakur called Revolution is Love. And this is how you would start the dinner out. I'm going to read this. I know that's kind of hokey, but I think it's they're beautiful. It's a beautiful poem, and maybe something great to think about today. This is the 21st century, and we need to define revolution. This planet needs a people's revolution. We need to redefine revolution. This planet needs a people's revolution, a humanist revolution. Revolution is not about bloodshed or about going to the mountains and fighting. We'll fight if we are forced to, but the fundamental goal of revolution must be peace. We need a revolution of the mind, a revolution of the heart. We need a revolution of the spirit. The power of the people is stronger than any weapon. A people's revolution can't be stopped. We need to be weapons of mass construction, weapons of mass love. It's not enough to change the system. We need to change ourselves. We have got to make the world user-friendly. User-friendly. Are you ready to sacrifice to end world hunger? To sacrifice to end colonialism? To end neo-colonialism? To end racism? To end sexism? Revolution means the end of exploitation. Revolution means respecting people from other cultures. Revolution is creative. Revolution means treating your mate as a friend and an equal. Revolution is sexy. Revolution means respecting and learning from our children. Revolution is beautiful. Revolution means protecting the people, the plants, the animals, the air, the water. Revolution means saving the planet. Revolution is love. We start the dinner off, and if you can see here in the corner, we tried this dinner on in the museum itself, and each person goes around the table and reads a line until it's finished. And then we start in conversation around the things that we may want to change, that we want, and that could be personal and intimate or political. Each person can bring their conversation to the table. And then the next time it was performed was in New York, where the exhibition took place. So 2 dinners, different locations. And I feel like by reading that poem, in essence, you're kind of framing the experience for folks. This is another piece that was part of that exhibition, Dinner for Remembering. And in this, it's a piece from it, one of the pages. And in this piece, the host is asked to create a theme in which people will come to a dinner and tell stories around that theme. So in this case, my gallery hosted the dinner and they chose music. So people brought, it's a potluck. So they brought food connected to their favorite song or music or era or something a story that connected to a song that they cared about. And as a result, it was really lousy music. So that's how or really lousy food. So that's how this can work. So, we had Budweiser and smoked fish and fried chicken and popcorn and Doritos, but it made for an amazing night, and it was hilarious. And people had all these wonderful stories connected to all different eras of music. This is a more recent piece. You can't read it very well, I apologize. Getting over it, or at least getting through it. It's another dinner, and what comes with it is matches and books that you can write something that you want to release and then burn that piece of paper. This is dinner to tell a joke, and the cups in which you drink out of also can be clown noses, and it's a dinner for laughter and for sharing humor. And then this is another piece that I developed while in residency with the Schneider Museum at SOU, Instructions for Drinking with a Friend. So when I said that at one point, these have different experiences, what I mean by this is that these kind of, as I call them, still lives, have multiple levels of experience. So they can be viewed contemplatively, they can be activated, or they can be, we can imagine the activation of them, this kind of in-between space. And what I mean by that is, if you think of a Morandi still life, you'd never think about pulling one of those glasses or pictures off of a Morandi still life painting and drinking out of it. But these are designed to imagine that you would kind of participate with it if you wanted, that you could look at the book and pilfer the instructions and do it yourself. So in the case of this, here are the instructions. You're to invite a friend to share whiskey for an hour and to engage in a conversation around something you don't typically talk about. So, and maybe to do it in a place that you wouldn't normally share a drink, like on a roof, in the woods, in an attic, in a tree house, in a hallway, and at the beach, and so on. That's also etched into the whiskey, which was produced by a local whiskey producer. You start this particular piece out by reading Charles Baudelaire's poem, Get Drunk. So part of the reason these instructions exist is so that it gets people into the right mindset and also gets them to focus. And Get Drunk by Baudelaire has really nothing to do with getting drunk, but more about having passion around something, caring about something deeply. So when quiet and not activated, the piece kind of acts as a tableau. So you can see the shelf on the right where the kits resides, and then there's a table set. But when it's activated, as it was both when it exhibited in the gallery at the Kristen Tierney Gallery in New York, and then also at Elizabeth Leach in Portland, Oregon, once it's activated, there are multiple levels of experience. There's the intimate experience of the two people who are participating with it. And then there's also the experience of the audience watching it. It's kind of like watching My Dinner with Andre, if anyone remembers that movie. I think it was like literally from the 70s, maybe. But so it affords these different levels of experience. One where the people who are participating are both experiencing something and acting as performers, so that blurred line. And those who are in audience or viewing the gallery exhibition are watching in essence a performance. This is one of the drawings from the book. And then at the end of all of the books, regardless of which dinner, interactive dinner it is, there is an archive. And in the archive, it always asks for different information. In the case of this archive, it asks for the location and then topics for conversation. So it's a way of logging the various experiences. So the book itself really becomes a repository of all these different experiences and noted in kind of different ways. And this is the last book I'm going to show you, because as I mentioned kind of in the beginning, there's been a lot of pivoting that's had to happen in the art world these days. So I was commissioned to do a piece for the Sun Valley Art Museum for around their an anniversary exhibition, which is around the camas flower. So this is a dinner for a camas flower. It again has nothing to do with camas flowers, except for the fact that the book is all about how objects contain narratives and stories. So if you think about that letter you save, or that ornament you have, or that special dish from somebody, objects have these narratives and these stories. And the camas flower has like 11,000 year history of that connects to the tribes, to nutrition, to war, to pioneers. It's all exists in this tiny little purple flower. So this is a dinner where people can come and come together and bring an object and tell the story of that object and what it connects to. Okay, kind of the last series of pieces that I wanted to talk about today, because it's also, they're very much embedded in kind of audience participation and interactivity, is a series of performative pieces that I did called Choreography for Reading Aloud. Each time this project is performed, it comes with a bookmark and people get bookmarks. So in essence, Choreography for Reading Aloud is, I work with the texts of a site. So in this case, it was Canada Gallery in New York. So a group of readers read from what was in the gallery itself. So the Richard Serra piece, this is Demian Desarachi, and he's reading his poetry. He was also in the same exhibition. And there are people who are reading how to make they're reading press releases, how to make the air conditioner work in the gallery. So there's this whole different set of texts. In essence, it's turning the volume up in the text in a space. So if we think about all the texts that we have in our homes, they're always quiet. They're waiting to be activated. And this turns the volume up. So this is the first time the piece was performed. And then audience members can go through. In this case, the folks were kind of either sitting on pedestals or like positioned as the art objects in the gallery itself. The next time it was performed was in the same year, was at the Reed Library. And we went from 12 performers to 48 performers. And I worked with the librarians there and another assistant to go through all these different texts. And these audience members could come into the library and move through, this is Jessie Spies-Werner, somebody I work with, move through the different readers. I actually saw Vimal Donato, who is also, I believe, reading for this in the audience earlier. But folks could move through the library and sit close and listen to somebody, or allow the various different texts to bump into each other, merge and collide. There were, in working with the library, we chose books based on kind of the various histories of the library. So we read, for example, this is up in where all the theses reside, in the tower. So people were reading an early work on defense of fascism next to somebody who was also reading on whiteness. So there are these different years and histories where these texts are kind of coming together in the same place. And there were books that were read. For example, we read a piece on Keats, and somebody asked at one point, why that book? And that book, in like over 100 years, had never been checked out from the library. So can you imagine if you were a book and your whole purpose is to be read, you know, and you've never once had your pages cracked? So obviously we read that book. We read things, James Beard cookbooks and his works, because he was a student at Reed that was asked to leave at one point and couldn't finish his education there because of kind of his positionality. So it was these different histories of the library coming together. And then this is the last piece that I wanted to just quickly mention, which is actually was done for the Hallie Ford Museum as part of Paying Attention. And I worked with the library, the Special Collections Library at Willamette, the Mark Hatfield Library. And all of the text, this too had 50 some readers, and they were all texts on the history of Oregon. So some of them were like these beautiful texts, journals from artists and politicians, and others were really difficult texts to read on the early pioneers and the missionaries. So these different histories and kind of some of the more difficult histories of Oregon kind of came together, and audiences once again could move through. So for example, at this table, the books were there so an audience member could actually sit down and read if they chose. Wow. Sorry about that. Or they could simply move through. So this is the last piece that I'm going to show today. I really wanted to kind of focus on activating viewership, but I want to finish by saying one of the things for me that's really important in my practice is that these interactions, regardless of what they are something that are familiar to folks. That it's, so I work with things that are habits in our daily life, eating, reading. I do projects that involve travel and taxi services and braiding, things that are familiar and that are gesture sequences that we understand, because I feel in some ways those help people connect to the work and allow the other subject of matter of the work to resonate. So I am done, and I'm going to stop sharing and see if folks have any questions.
Thank you, MK. If anybody has any questions, you may unmute and ask MK directly, or type it into the chat, in which I am happy to read aloud for everybody.
There are some in the chat.
Yeah, there's some comments during your talk from the chat. Some people mentioning how they had participated, especially in the drinking one with a friend at the Leach Gallery, which happened to be in the early morning time, and created an unforgettable, extremely bonding experience. If there's no particular questions at this time, MK, I have a question for you. You know, with the most recent piece, Canvas and Canvas Fields, and having to do that via remote Zoom during this time of COVID and pandemic, and your work being rooted in social practice, what has been some of the ideas or bits of inspiration for new pieces? With us social distancing, what kind of maybe focus a bit more on positive ideas have come to mind for you for possible future projects?
Well, so the new stack that I have, book stack that I have, is on love, because I think right now we all need a lot of care. It's like we're a bunch of folks that are all struggling simultaneously, collectively struggling. And I think it's good sometimes to pivot and look at care and love and what that means. So the stack book, I thought I might actually have it done for this, but I don't. And not photographs. So is 5,000 pages on love that people can add. And so on the things that you have to pivot for. So I have a project that I'm doing with UCLA for their performance schedule. They have a big performance schedule, and it's on Susan. So it's choreography for reading aloud, knowing an author. And it's all around Susan Sontag. So I spent a week in residency again in their special collections library, and they received the Susan Sontag collection. So it's this amazing like repository, an archive of Susan Sontag's work. And so I spent all of this time getting ready for this. It's gonna be done in the Powell Library. So it was canceled last year. And then it just came last week. I had to make a choice on what to do. Do I change it and make it something that can exist online, like what we're experiencing together right now? Is there a way to do that? Or did I want to move it out yet again? And so I'm moving it out yet again because I think we have a lot of Zoom. And I feel like for me, I'd like to be able to offer something very physical and tangible for the audience when they get on the other side. Here's the other pickle. Like, I spent all this time researching, and I mean, I've been teaching Susan Sontag for a long time, but you know, I literally have read works that influenced her, and you know, it's just been like 2 years of Susan Sontag in every way, shape, and form. And now I'm sitting here going, gosh, maybe I should change the subject matter. Like, at that moment, it seemed very relevant, and now I'm feeling this pang to kind of move in a slightly different direction because the world needs something different. I mean, What Needs to Be Said was produced right after Trump was elected. But now maybe we need something different. So I think, Scott, like probably all folks on this Zoom, we're figuring out what we need, and what we need is a little different than what we needed a year ago. And I think art's starting to reflect that.
Thank you, MK. V. Maldonado did pose a question in the chat, which I think you just answered. The question was, thank you for sharing your work. What are you working on now? Who are you interested in working with? Yeah, I think you might have answered that. We have another, Tori, do you want to unmute? Are you able to unmute, Tori?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I'm just curious because your work is so social. Like, how do you get inspired right now? Because we're not, I mean, like, socializing is so different.
So I'm not doing anything like that right now. I'm drawing, and I have a series of woven pieces. I mean, I restricted a lot of what I showed today, so I'm spending a lot of time sewing and drawing and researching. It's, for me, because I work in education, like that practice, it just keeps me, for me, I think it keeps me sharper. I'm not sure that's really true, but I think it's true. So, and the social aspect of my work, the reason I wanted to talk about, because I could have easily turned this around and shown more like images and objects, but I actually feel like we should be talking about sociability right now, because we are going to be on the other side of this at some point. I kind of wonder what that's going to look like. I mean, we spend so much time doing this, right? And I think maybe it's going to take a while, and it's going to take some practice to be out in the world again. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. That's like, you know, I don't have a crystal ball. This is just a hypothesis, probably based on how I feel personally. So I like thinking about it, and I like thinking about what those types of interactions might look like. I did a piece with Jody Cavalier a couple of years ago, an artist that I know, and we did this huge project out at Camp Colton, and it was a 3.5-hour dinner. There's 65 acres at this camp. You have to drive out there to be part of this. And over these 3 hours, you go from place to place to place, and you get a little snack or a little treat and something to drink. And then it would come with a story or a narrative. And it had like such a, and then at the end, there was this like epic meal. We did it with a chef too. So we had a lot of people helping us. And it was such a coming together, right? And it was such something that made everybody feel like for a moment they were part of a community, even though they didn't know everyone in the room. And I feel like it's good to be thinking about what that might be in the future. So I'm willing to pivot periodically, and also I don't consider myself a social practice artist. How about that? Even though my work is incredibly relational and social. Do you work? I'm just curious, Tori, do you work socially at all?
Actually, last quarter, Maria de Los Angeles, she introduced me to your work. And I think that was like the first time I was like, oh, there's something else that I could do. So I actually just did a project called Hot Lunch and Good Advice. it was kind of like, it was kind of based off of you just like sitting in a gallery and having dinner with people. And I made this like, I don't know, 10 or 12 foot tall chair and stacked a bunch of tables and then had like a little get together where people could like ask questions, because we couldn't really have like the I don't know, annual hot lunch and good advice because of COVID. So
that's great. You know, I think when I was in graduate school, like I was pretty much told I couldn't do this type of work. And so the first thing I did when I got out of graduate school was start to do this type of work, of course, because that's inevitably, you know, what you end up doing. But I find there's something that art can exist in all these different forms. It can exist within a drawing. It can exist in a conversation. And I feel like there's something physical and intimate when people are able to kind of have an activated experience.
A few more questions in the chat, MK. One is, when do you think you will hire your next assistant? Just curious, from Rich Van Gogh.
Not enough work, Rich, to hire an assistant right now, but I'll keep you in mind.
Susan Morrow, would you like to unmute?
Yeah. Hi, MK.
Susan, it's so great to see you.
Hi. Hello from Eastern Oregon. Yeah, I love how you framed this gesture sequences that we understand. Like that gesture sequences seems like such an accessibility point that I think people miss sometimes. But it just struck me that you're taking so much kind of ephemeral experience or just floating thoughts, you know, wishes and things that people that ruminate on, hopes, and then you're really materializing them in this way and making something that's really visually rich. I mean, with maybe some of your finished photography that you put in galleries, or sculpturally, you know, just dense materiality. So I just am struck by this idea that it's like you're just like helping people, you know, pick out this ephemeral kind of fleeting thoughts and moments and really distilling it to something that's kind of heavy and visually stunning. So I just wondered if you could elaborate on that at all, or talk about what you think that process does for the viewers, the participants, or yourself in the practice.
So I'm a believer in objects, and because I think we talk so much about like how this is the end of objects, right? We shouldn't collect anything, we shouldn't have things, and yet they're the things that transport us, right? So when we go to that letter or that painting, nice painting back there, Susan, by the way, those take us into the body of the work and what that work generates for us, but it also transports us to the moment when that work became part of our life, when that work became part of, like, I have work from, you know, 30 years ago. I have work from friends, and I love having their work around me because it transports me to them. And so for me, with these kind of fleeting moments, or these ways of kind of amplifying a public voice and then locating them into an object, just allows that object to be a vessel or a container for all of that. And the thing that I like about the outcomes, like I do all these woven pots out of this piece that I did in New York back in like 2011. The thing I love about them is they don't look at all, I mean, they're like totally transformed, and yet they hold all of that history and meaning, and they connect to something. And I think for me, that's what objects and images do. And that's why I think, you know, artistic production is so important. It gives us, it transports us somewhere. It gives us a place to land or to go or to think about, or, you know, those things.
Great, thank you.
Great meaning for me.
Anne DeSalvo, would you like to unmute?
Yes. Hi. Is it true that you are from Stevens Point, Wisconsin? And
Gosh, I I was born in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, but I grew up in Wisconsin Rapids.
Oh, near enough.
Where are you from?
I'm from Stevens Point. And UWSP is my alma mater, and I was wondering if you studied there.
I didn't study there. I went to Madison. But, you know, I've actually done things for that particular university, just because it's proximity to, yeah, that's so, you know, nobody knows that area at all. I always say I'm from Stevens Point because if I say Wisconsin Rapids,
it's even more obscure.
Yeah, it's even more obscure. So,
well,
how long have you been in Oregon?
Since 1992.
So this is really home now.
Yes.
Yeah. They're having a lot of snow right now, as I understand it.
I heard, yes, it's quite cold.
They have a lot of wood ticks. I don't like wood ticks.
I'm very glad to be involved in this talk of yours. Thank you.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. In our Zoom room.
Well, MK and everybody, we are out of time. MK, I would like to thank you so much for joining us and giving us this time to talk about your work. You were one of the first Oregon-based artists I've did a studio visit with when I first came out from New York City, and had the affinity for you and your work as artists who have lived through and sustained careers in the trials and tribulations of NYC. And I'm so happy to have connected with you here in Oregon and to have worked with you in the past. And I'm sure we will be doing wonderful things again in the future.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody.